Wonderful. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this joint Canadian Historical Association Canadian Archivist event. What can you do with that? All to act careers after the grad degree, put on by the CHA's Graduate Students Committee. The GSC is made up of a single graduate representative from each Canadian university's history department. If your history department grad program currently lacks a GSC representative, feel free to reach out to either myself or your department's grad student organization to seat a representative. We have funds for committee projects. We are a forum to connect grad students across Canada. We have a direct line of communication with the CHA Council along with a voting seat, and we put on events like this one. And I'm so happy to begin this event by first acknowledging the sacred land on which the University of Toronto, where I'm speaking from, operates. This has been a site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Toon First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Bell Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and as a settler, I and other settlers are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. I would also like to acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, and those who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Though I am not a person of African descent, I'm committed to continually acting in support of and in solidarity with Black communities seeking freedom and imperative justice in light of the history and ongoing legacy of slavery that continues to impact Black communities in Canada. As part of this commitment, I would also like to acknowledge that not all people came to these lands as migrants and settlers. Specifically, I wish to acknowledge those who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. I'm aligned with ongoing efforts to confront anti-Black racism within academia as a profession and in Canadian history as a discipline. I support ongoing efforts to confront anti-Black racism, and I pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. Thank you. We are here to talk about professions, both in, around, beyond, and part of academia. The title of the event is, I'm sure, something that we've all heard at some point from our friends and loved ones. What can you do with that? What are you going to do with that? We all have our answers. We all know about the many transferable skills provided by degrees in history, archiving, and the humanities, in addition to the many non-professional benefits of an arts degree to one's matriculation as a person. Our three panelists today have their own unique answers, and I'm sure some similarities to what they have done with their degrees. Each of our panelists will speak for around 10 to 15 minutes on their degrees, subsequent career trajectories, and how the skills or experience gained in academia helped with their career success. I, of course, am Aino Pihlak, PhD candidate at the University of Toronto and the CHA's graduate student representative. I will moderate the Q&A after the three panelists. Feel free to pop your questions in the chat throughout the presentations, or I can unmute you if you would like to ask your question over video. I would note that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the CHA's YouTube. So if you do not want to be on screen, but would like your question asked, feel free to privately DM me your question. With that, let's get underway. Our first presenter is Dr. Sharanjit Kaur Sandhra, or Sharn, who is a historian, educator, storyteller, and founder of Belonging Matters Consulting. She also works as a sessional faculty in the Department of History at the University of the Fraser Valley and as a senior program advisor in the Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism program in Canadian Heritage. Sharn has more than 2 decades of experience in museum curation, community heritage work, and mentoring youth. She became the first Punjabi and Sikh to complete her PhD from the Department of History at the University of British Columbia in 2022. Her PhD looks at the effective experiences of museum visitors through a critical race theory lens, and her dissertation is titled Museums as Spaces of Belonging, Racialized Power in the Margins. Sharan is a passionate activist and dynamic storyteller, building bridges between community and academia, who has been featured in the Knowledge Network series, BC, An Untold History. She is the co-author of Challenging Racist BC, 150 Years and Counting, and has been featured on local and international podcast media. And I am excited to be told the story of her many careers. Please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Aino. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited and always excited to talk about different careers and exciting careers that we can all take, because it is absolutely a question I received day in and day out while I was doing my PhD, as a first gen PhD in the family. And by first gen, meaning nobody else in the family from both sides of my family and in my in-laws family had ever experienced somebody going through the process of academia and PhDs. And I think there might be many of us who kind of been in the same boat. And so being in this unknown territory and facing the questions we face can be difficult. So it's always nice to talk about the ways we can take these careers. I do also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all from the unceded, ancestral, and stolen territories of the Saltsmuk people in Abbotsford, British Columbia. So it is about 10:10 a.m. PST my time. And I wanted to just also mention things that we bring into these spaces. So right now, I'm dealing with my elderly mother-in-law who has shingles. She's 82 and she's in a lot of pain. And then I have my son who's going to be doing his end test in about half an hour. So I might be looking at my phone, just hearing updates. And the reason why I like to do that is because we often aren't granted or afforded to bring our whole selves to these spaces. And we try to separate and box off our academic lives or our careers with just the lived experiences we have. And so just to share that my brain may be in different places, perimenopausal as well. So it's like all these things are taking place. But I'm very excited to be amongst you all, and also honored to be a council member with the Canadian Historical Association. And I will also share how that came about as well. So my journey into academia is, I think, unique in many different ways, and perhaps also not unique in the way many of you have experienced your master's or PhD. So my master's is from the Asian Studies Department at the University of British Columbia. I received my master's in 2008, and I took a goodness, many years gap between my master's and my PhD. So I began my PhD no, apologies, the years jumble. 2008, I finished my master's, and then 2000 and I think it was 14, I began my PhD. So there was a good several years gap between my master's and PhD. And I did my PhD in the Department of History, as Aino mentioned, at UBC. Why I mentioned the gap is because within that gap, I married. I had 2 children. So my boys were 5 and 3 years old when I began my PhD. And I also worked a full-time job and continued to work a full-time job while doing my PhD because, it's the hustle. We all have to hustle and carry multiple different jobs because this is just kind of the economy and situations we are in. So I worked a full-time job, had very young children, and I was the only one of 2 other people in my cohort who were in the similar situation where we had children. Everybody else was, they didn't have children and they were in different situations of being able to just focus in on their studies, though I understand that everybody has complexities in their lives. And I'm sure it wasn't easy for them either. But I was also the only brown person in my cohort in the PhD program at UBC. And I'm still the only brown person or Sikh Punjabi woman to have completed her PhD out of UBC. And why I mention these firsts is because it's a reminder of how we often, some people don't find themselves safe in these spaces, in these academic spaces. Or what is it about mentorship and fostering academia to be a consistent place of opportunity for people who haven't traditionally graduated from these spaces with a PhD especially. And so my journey was not easy at all. In fact, I write about this in my dissertation. I begin my dissertation, my PhD, by talking about an experience where a faculty member called me in my first semester and told me that I don't belong in the program and that I should do a master's, which I already had. And for me, writing about that experience was very cathartic, and it was very healing for me to write about that experience because in that moment, so again, full-time working mom, 3-year-old, 5-year-old, commuting about an hour and a half from Abbotsford to Vancouver, UBC, to take these courses, to be called into an office where I already am feeling imposter syndrome. I feel like I don't belong. I feel like I'm not as smart as everybody else. To be told by a faculty member that I don't belong was a real polarizing moment for me where I thought I would quit the program. And I almost did quit the program. But luckily, my supervisor, Dr. Henry Yu, an incredible mentor, talked me through it, walked me through it, has been a supporter ever since, guided me in a way that allowed me to continue. And so I did continue despite wanting to quit in that moment. So it did take me 8 years to finish my PhD. From about 2016 to 2022 was when I finished my dissertation. And I made sure that I wrote about that moment in my dissertation. And the reason why I wanted to make sure I told that story in my dissertation is because I wanted to make sure other people who felt like I did, like felt like they're imposters or they don't belong or their lived experiences aren't welcome in these spaces, could somehow, somewhere see themselves reflected through my dissertation. And so my journey, I'll be very honest, in academia has not been easy ever since, right? Like academia is not a safe space for Black women, Indigenous women, racialized women, trans people. Like it's just not a safe space for people. And so I know it's not easy to hear, but we all have to do better in making these spaces safe spaces for people. And so I finished my PhD, and I had been working at the South Asian Studies Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley for about 15 years as coordinator. It wasn't an academic position, but that job allowed me to build community relationships for 2 decades. And because of those amazing relationships that I had, I was able to get a job in Parks Canada for about a year. I worked as a historian. And then eventually the job that I have now, which is as a senior program advisor in the multiculturalism and anti-racism program. Each one of the jobs that I've received in my life and opportunities in terms of the academic field is because of relationships I have actually fostered outside of academia, which is really interesting. And I'd be super curious to hear if others have had that experience as well. All the relationships, the museum exhibits work that I did, created bridges after bridges after bridges with other communities and friendships with other people that has allowed me to have such a more fulsome experience that is not simply just within the university space. So I want to be mindful of not taking up too much space, but I am hustling in this moment as well right now. So my 9 to 5 is the public service job. I teach sessional in history at the University of the Fraser Valley, and I've been teaching sessional for more than 7 years now. And I also do consulting work. And the consulting work is what allows me to fill that part of my spirit, which is the museum curation part, the community, heritage work, because I don't always get to do that in my 9 to 5 or in my academic work. The other thing that I found with my consulting work is that I get to mentor. Now, mentorship to me is very cyclical. I learn from other people just as much as mentorship as something that is like power based, where somebody has more power than the other. Mentorship to me is very parallel. But my concern has always been, because nobody's hiring me permanently within academic spaces as a permanent faculty, how will I get to mentor other people like me, or other people who just need to feel safe but have excited energies about doing academic work? And it's been through my other work that I've been able to mentor, support younger people who are in the archives, heritage, history sector. And so I think I found like the sweet spot right now. And I'm happy to share more and not take up too much space, but that's been kind of my journey. That's where I'm at right now. I also want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Erin Millions, whom I met during my Parks Canada tenure there. And it's because of Aaron that I was recommended to be on the CHA Council, which has been a whole other door for me. I'll be very honest, I would not have thought of the CHA or paid attention to the CHA otherwise, if not for Dr. Aaron Millions. And again, those are those beautiful bridge building opportunities. And now, because of my role here, I've been able to get grants to support other racialized students and mentor other students and provide them opportunities, for example, to attend the conference in PEI. So grateful. And I do believe that there is serendipity around some of this beautiful relationships that we get to foster. I'll end there. I look forward to hearing people's questions and look forward to hearing from Taylor and Adam. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Getting us off on such a wonderful start. Amazing. Our next speaker, Adam Williamson, is a director at large for the Association of Canadian Archivists and currently works at the United Church of Canada Archives as a general counsel processing archivist. Previously, he worked at the United Church as the archives digitization assistant focused on truth and reconciliation work. Within the ACA, Adam is responsible for supporting the 5 university-based student chapters spread out across the country. He completed his Master's in Information at the University of Toronto in 2024 and his Bachelor of Arts in History at Brock University in 2021. And I'm so excited to hear more about your subsequent career success. Please take it away, Adam.
Thank you. I know I'll admit I kind of forgot about that introductory, so I had a whole extra new thing prepared, but that's okay. But also thank you, Sharon. I loved hearing your story. So yeah, hi, I'm Adam. And I feel like my career trajectory has been very short so far. I still feel very fresh and new in it since I'm kind of finding my legs in the archival profession. But I felt like the way I kind of wanted to approach this and kind of navigating things outside of academia was to kind of take everyone kind of through my journey. And I found the best way to start that was when I felt like my career, I don't know, I feel weird calling my career, but was when my career kind of had plateaued after I had graduated from Brock. Because at that time I graduated and I had decided to leave my job because it was a really stressful job and I didn't really like it. And then I kind of sat there and was like, well, I don't know what to do next. I'm not sure about all the skills I've developed during my undergrad in history, where they could take me, the types of jobs they could apply to. And because of that, I still remember feeling so anxious, stressed, scared, just uncertain of where I wanted to go in the future. If only I knew now what I knew then, maybe things would have been different. But what it ended up doing was I took a year off to kind of reflect on kind of what I enjoyed, what I wanted to do. And I remembered I had done some work with a professor on some digital archiving. And I was like, oh yeah, I really did like that. And I always enjoyed going into archives and working with records. So that then took me to looking into archival programs, and I decided to study at the University of Toronto, where I did my Master's of Information, which I have to say, I love the name of it because it's so like mysterious. What does that mean, Master of Information? But my focus was on archives and records management, and I specifically decided to do the co-op program because I was like, okay, this will help me get a bit of practical experience in archives, or can it help me get a feel for the landscape of the profession and the types of jobs out there? And you would imagine I would have done an archives co-op placement, but I didn't. I ended up doing a placement at the National Research Council of Canada in Information Management. And when it popped up, I was like, oh, this seems interesting. I know absolutely nothing about information management, but you know what? Let's submit my application and see where it takes me. And I was kind of inspired a bit by a couple friends who I think really drive for me this point home about when you're looking at what kind of jobs you want to do, where you're not sure what sort of fields you want to get into outside of academia, to just try. You never know if you'll enjoy the work you do or if you'll enjoy that field unless you try. And these two friends, one of them, he did his undergrad in medical science, and he now works as a uh, assistant manager at a bank branch. And the other one did her Master's of Museum Studies at U of T and now works as an underwriter at CIBC. I think we can all agree that those jobs are not really connected to what we'd normally assume would fit for medical science or museum studies. And I think that just goes to show you the skills that you develop in the humanities they're really transferable and they can kind of help you with jobs in any sort of field they might be interested in getting into. But returning to myself and the information management job, I had no previous experience in information management. None of my courses were focused on it. I hadn't worked in the information management field before. So you might be wondering, well, what did I do? How did I talk about skills that are relevant to it? And for me, a lot of that was focused on highlighting coursework. So I know broadly speaking, for humanities, we're writing a lot of essays. We're doing a lot of presentations. We're speaking in seminars. And for people who do their thesis, the whole side of your thesis work you can draw on. And you can look at things like when you're doing your essay, it's written communication. You have attention to detail, you're synthesizing knowledge. You might be able to even say that you have qualitative research skills and experience. Similarly, when you're doing your presentations or your seminars, you have your verbal communication skills. You can draw on experience to show that you are comfortable presenting to a wide range of audiences. And that's partly what I did. Now, in some ways, I feel like my master's kind of cheated because it's slightly a vocational master's. So I was able to draw on specific coursework that was a little relevant to what they were looking for, like working with metadata. And so that's something I had done was I had drew on a project I'd done developing a metadata schema for Magic the Gathering. And that helped me, kind of grab that position. But once I got there, I realized, or I came to find that it was a lot of those transferable skills from my graduate program that were helping me because I was writing short, concise instructions for people for how to navigate the programs we use. I was giving training tutorials. I was also presenting information management best practices to people at the executive level, but also broadly people working at the larger teams. And so different types of information and how to communicate what was relevant to each group. Those were all skills that weren't necessarily information management geared skills. They were skills I developed previously and were able to pull into the job. And really the technical stuff, the best practices in information management, I ended up learning more on the job. And that was kind of the expectation of my boss as well. She was like, that's okay. You'll kind of get the feel for it and you can go from there. But she was really interested in those transferable skills I have. Now, at the same time when I was applying for the information management job, I had gotten an email from the Association of Canadian Archivists basically saying, hey, this is a call for papers. We're looking for emerging voices for students. Please submit a paper and we'll consider it to speak on a panel. And it was like, I think it was like 2 days before the deadline. And I was like, oh, you know what? Let's give this a go. I doubt that I'll be chosen, but we'll see where this takes me. Lo and behold, I ended up being chosen, which much to my surprise. And I went and attended the conference there. I met a lot of wonderful people, including members of the board at the time, and was like, well, this was fun. I'm not sure where it's going to take me in the future, but I'm going to return to my IM job and go from there. Forget you heard anything about my bio. We'll put a pin in this and return to it. But for now, this takes me to kind of the end of my master's degree. I finished up my second and final semester. My information management job was winding down, and it just so happened that the United Church of Canada Archives had put out a job posting for a digitization assistant. And I was like, oh, this is a really great entry-level position. There's nothing too extraneous that they're asking for here. I think I have a good shot at it. The only catch was I still didn't really have any practical archival experience. It was now in information management and previous work in customer service. So again, I returned to my coursework. I looked at a lot of arrangement description courses I had done, as well as appraisal. And I kind of drew on those experiences to highlight my knowledge of archival best practices. And I was like, okay, I put a lot of emphasis on archives. This is great. I also highlighted through my coursework those transferable skills that my previous boss had liked. And when I was asked on this panel, I went to my two bosses who were on the hiring panel at the time, and I was like, so why did you hire me? What really stuck out to you guys that made me an attractive candidate? I was a little surprised to hear them say. One said it was my knowledge of programs, so the Microsoft Suite, specifically SharePoint, being able to highlight those through my coursework was great, and through my previous work experience, as well as my honesty in admitting when I didn't know the answer to something. And I wish I knew what I had said at that time to kind of highlight that and give you guys maybe a little more insight into how to go about explaining that without making it seem like you don't know anything. But whatever I had said, she thought really highly of in terms of how I was able to estimate my own skills and knowledge and not be afraid to do that. My other boss, she had said that she liked my information management experience. All that work there, working with records in that capacity, she thought was amazing. Similarly, too, going back to writing essays, she really liked how I had that background ability and knowledge to take in large amounts of information, understand it, and then concisely narrow it down and either write about it or explain it or just process it in a way that other people could read without necessarily having to read that large amount of knowledge. Um, so that kind of gives a window. I thought it was better to focus on archives, but it was actually all my surrounding experience outside of that that really helped me to get the job. And similarly, when I got my current job as the general counsel processing archivist, my current boss wrote to me after the interview and was like, "Hey, I just want to say I was really impressed with how you were able to pull your coursework and use it in place of practical experience, even when you didn't have it, because it was highlighting those skills that we were looking for." And I was like, "Oh, super. I'm glad to know it works." And so I want to really emphasize to everyone that as you're doing this, your coursework, you're writing your essays, you're doing your presentations, and you're speaking in seminar, um, don't sell yourself short. You're developing skills in these fields. Don't forget about them. And I think when you're looking for jobs, especially at entry level, it's okay that you might not have all the practical experience you might not be looking for. And it's okay to kind of fill in some of those gaps with the coursework you've been doing because it is work. You develop skills, you put in the time and the experience. And that's something that you shouldn't be discouraging yourself from. And I think it's a great tool. And lastly, because I also don't want to take up too much time, we'll be very quick. Around the same time when I applied for the United Church of Canada job, the Vice President, Angela, of the Association of Archivists reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I hope you remember me from when we met back at the conference last year, but I was wondering if you wanted to run for a board position." And I was like, "Oh man, the vice president of the associations reached out and remembered me? Oh, I think I'll consider doing this." I need to emphasize, I had no prior board experience. I've never sat on the committee. I didn't even work, wasn't even involved with the ACA student chapter. I had no sort of context where I could see myself doing the position I'm in now. But I said yes, and I did, and it opened up my professional network. And I met so many wonderful archivists, so many people that shared with me their experiences, their thoughts on the field, and kind of gave me support and help as I kind of navigated job searching. And that's something that is still ongoing. I'm still having that support. It's been fantastic. And I think that's another thing I want to highlight is don't forget about your professional network. Not necessarily that you always need to be going out and meeting people and just thinking about it broadly in terms of I'm networking, but just meeting people and having that. It's not only a way to connect yourself for opportunities, but it's also a great support network for when you're coming up with challenges or the frustrations of finding work. And who knows, maybe in a couple of years' time, you might find yourself on this side of the panel giving a similar story as I'm doing right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Yeah, that notion of like holistic self, I think is just so key. And we have one more panelist, but feel free to pop questions into the chat or Q&A as we keep going. Yes. Taylor D. Starr is a historian.
Hello.
Hello, historian. Taylor, if I may, Taylor is, I think, 3 stories above me in the same office building. Taylor D. Starr is a historian, researcher, and writer whose work focuses on Canadian legal history, women and gender, law reform, public memory, and the history of legal education. She holds a PhD in history from York University and is the recipient of a SSHRC Canada Postdoctoral Research Award at the Department of History at the University of Toronto. She is currently a research consultant at Sandhra. Her forthcoming book, She Entered Anyway, Canadian Law Faculties and the Women Who Transformed Them, 1961 to 1994, examines the gendered history of Canadian law faculties and the women who challenged exclusion within legal education. Taylor's research and writing have appeared in scholarly collections on Canadian legal history, women's history, family law reform, and feminist advocacy. She has contributed to projects with the Osgood Society, Canadian Legal History, the Ontario Heritage Trust, the Canadian Museum of History, the BBC, Parks Canada, Street Haven at the Crossroads, the History Group, McMaster University, and the Standing Strong Task Force at Toronto Metropolitan University. Alongside her academic work, she has extensive experience in public history, grant writing, policy research, affordable housing strategy, and community-based historical storytelling. Her work bridges archival research, legal history, public engagement, and practical policy development. I'm so excited for some public engagement from Taylor today on her many, many career successes. Please take it away, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Aino, and to you for organizing this and bringing me back to CHA after a little bit of a hiatus. So thank you so much. I echo, what my earlier panelists have said. I feel like there's a lot of it is about serendipity and, the people that we know and the connections that we have. And I'm just so grateful to learn from your experiences as well today. So thank you guys. So, the title of the session, what can you do with that? It's a question we know a lot of us get. And sometimes it's asked with faint implication that a graduate degree in history is a beautiful but yet impractical thing. Something noble, perhaps, but not exactly useful. So for a long time, I think graduate students are trained implicitly, if not explicitly, to imagine the PhD as preparation for one primary career outcome, a tenure-track job. Everything else can feel like a detour, a compromise, or, that plan B that nobody really wants to talk about. But my experience after graduate school in the very short time that I've been post-graduate school has taught me the contrary. The historical training itself is not narrow. It's the way we're taught to imagine its possible uses that can be too narrow. I was lucky enough, however, at York University to have professors and supervisors who were mentors to help me imagine the breadth of my skills very early on. Those jobs that I was afforded throughout my tenure as a graduate student actually directly translated in being able to apply myself to a diverse range of fields upon completion. So, I wasn't necessarily looking for the teaching job and I wasn't necessarily looking for any of those things. It was what stood out to me and how can I use my skills that I know that I have because I've been informed that I have them. Sometimes it's just about someone telling you, you can do this. I actually had my supervisor say to me, you are a historian. And then I suddenly became one. I completed my PhD at York University in 2025, working in Canadian legal history, as Aino has, brought our attention to, and also women's history and the history of law faculties more broadly. My academic work examines women's entry into Canadian legal education, systemic sex discrimination, feminist legal thought, and the long relationship between legal institutions and social reform. That remains central to who I am as a historian. Of course, I'm preparing my first book for the UBC Press. And most recently, I've become the Shirk postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto, where I'm also a course instructor in the fall and in the winter. But I still continue to publish and present in legal history. So I'm very much tied to academia. But alongside this path, I've built a working life that includes public history, grant writing, policy research, exhibit development, litigation research, institutional histories, and consulting. I've worked with museums, with archives, nonprofits, scholars, government adjacent bodies, and community organizations. I've written historical reports. I've developed commemorative materials. I've contributed to exhibits. I've supported land claims litigation research, worked on affordable housing and homelessness policy, and helped organizations tell their histories in ways that are useful to the present, to contemporary times. So that to me is really relevant. And I'm very fulfilled when I think about the work that I do every day. So again, when someone asks, what can you do with that history PhD? My answer is you can do many things. But more importantly, you can learn to recognize that what you are already doing is important. So graduate training teaches us how to enter unfamiliar worlds and make sense of them. So I too am a first generation academic. No one in my family even knew what I was doing when I was writing my comprehensive exams. But luckily I was, granted some bottle of champagne. They understood that locking yourself in your room for a whole summer is actually not what normal people do. But we're all sort of navigating these spaces, but it's an extraordinarily valuable skill. So we learn to locate evidence, assess its reliability, reconstruct context, identify silences in historical records, interpret competing accounts, and explain complexity without necessarily flattening it. We learn how to write for different audiences, manage long projects, work independently, meet deadlines, and sit with ambiguity. We learn how institutions work, how power is documented, how language conceals and reveals, and how the past continues to shape the present. These skills are civic, they're professional, and they're practical. My own, want to call it alt-ac path, began before I had the language for it. During graduate school, I worked as a research assistant on these projects that moved beyond the dissertation. I contributed to work on family law and access to justice, wildlife and environmental history. I thank Professor Colin Coates, who I think is on this call, for that interest. Canadian children's television, labor history, and legal reform. I worked on the Presidential Task Force on Edgerton Ryerson's legacy at Toronto Metropolitan University as a graduate student associate, which required historical research in an intensely public and politically charged context. Height of the pandemic, I'm happy to talk to anyone about this experience after the fact. And Ryerson's still one of those Canadian figures that continues to take up space. So, later I wrote a report for the Ontario Heritage Trust and lectured the Canadian Military College on these experiences that I had with doing that work and undertaking it at that time. It's taught me, though, that historical expertise moves beyond producing a monograph or an article. Sometimes it's about helping institutions understand their own past, and sometimes it's about giving decision makers language that is accurate, responsible, and historically grounded. Maybe it's about writing that 150-word plaque where every word has to carry the weight of archives, politics, collaboration, and public memory. We do all of these things all the time. So I'm just, in my talk today, I guess my big point is to pay attention to those skills and write them down. Public history has taught me that audiences outside the academy are not less rigorous. They're rigorous in different ways. They ask different questions. They want to know why something matters, who was harmed, who benefited, and what changed. What didn't change, and what should be done now? As historians, we're trained to look for continuity and change over time. So that's not a lesser form of historical engagement. It's one of the places where historical thinking is urgently needed. So I want to talk about one more really recent experience that I had. After completing my PhD, I began doing more work in the nonprofit and consulting sectors. At Street Haven at the Crossroads specifically, which is a women's shelter in Toronto, I worked as grant writing and research specialist. So I was the in-house grant writing and research specialist, but I came to that job by doing historical research. The call was to have an archivist produce an exhibit. I produced a 16-foot timeline for, and I curated it at the Art Gallery of Ontario for their 60th anniversary. And so that experience really changed how I understood the value of historical training. And this is what I urge my students, to retain them into the degrees in the humanities and social sciences more broadly, but in specifically history. So in that nonprofit sector, organizations are constantly being asked to explain themselves. They must demonstrate need, prove credibility, situate their work in a policy context, and tell a story that's both emotionally compelling and evidence-based. Historians are trained to do exactly that. We know how to build narratives that are grounded in evidence. We know how to connect individual experiences to larger structures. In the case of Street Haven at the Crossroads, their founder was a woman in the 1960s that decided to bring women off the street into her home and house them. At the time, there were no shelters for lesbian women or sex workers, and so that was quite revolutionary. So I was lucky to have that opportunity to tell that story at that time. To my knowledge, I don't even believe that Peggy Ann Walpole, the founder of that institution, was included in Toronto's museum, Great Women That Shaped Toronto exhibit. So, these are the things that we can uncover every day for these institutions who are still doing this work. And the same can be said about my work at Sonderbloom, where I've worked as a research consultant in affordable housing, strategic planning, and project management. So this may sound very far from a dissertation on women in Canadian law faculties, but the underlying skills are deeply connected. Housing policy, like legal history, requires attention to institutions, jurisdiction, language, inequality, and the relationship between policy design and lived experience. In that work, historical training has helped me to ask better questions. Who's being served? Who's excluded? What assumptions are embedded in this model? What evidence supports this claim? And what language will make this legible to government, funders, and community partners? So I have a little bit more, but I don't want to take up too much time. I guess the point here is that there can be a quiet grief attached to imagining career outside of the conventional academic track. Graduate school can make people feel that there's only one way to be serious about the work that they do, but seriousness is not confined to the tenure stream. If we're lucky enough to land there one day, we have the skills because we've been doing it this whole time. There are not mutually exclusive things, these alt-ac and academic, and I think we need to do a better job at bridging that gap. Serious historical work happens in classrooms, yes, but in museums, in community organizations, law offices, public inquiries, archives, consulting firms, et cetera, et cetera. I encourage you to reimagine your skills. And by translating, I guess, your skills into more relevant contexts, I don't mean dumbing it down. I mean describing or learning to describe, rather, how our skills in language can be recognizable to other people. In another context, so a historian might say, I work on feminist legal history. That's true, and it matters. But in other contexts, that might also mean I can analyze institutional culture. I can synthesize complex records. I can write for public audiences. I can manage long-term research projects. So my advice is to keep an inventory of your skills along with your output. So maybe you're doing your CV line, but also write down the skills that you acquired in doing that job. I think, we're trained to say yes to a lot of things until our undertaking gets really, really full. But just remember those skills that you've acquired, because those experiences build confidence. They build evidence of your work ethic. And, they build evidence of your contributions to public life. And I've actually also been lucky enough to sit on various committees as a graduate student at York University, where I understood that having some kind of experience in the public sector is actually what tenure track, assessments are looking for. So it can be a beautiful serendipitous thing that I think we can all just pay a bit more attention to. And that's why I'm so grateful to be part of this panel today. I also think that you can insist that historical thinking belongs in public life. So that's the answer I'd give now, not because every path is easy. Believe me, I'm sure all of our paths have been met with, those barriers. And not because the Academy's problems are solved by individual reinvention. Of course they're not. But the work historians do is larger than the structures that currently employ us. And our training gives us a way of seeing, of questioning, of organizing, and explaining the world. And that is needed far beyond the university. So perhaps the better question is not, what can you do with that? It's, where is historical thinking urgently needed? And how do we prepare historians to go there with confidence? Thank you so much. And I look forward to your questions.
Wow. Mic drop. What a way to, what a wonderful conclusion to our panelists' presentations. Oh, golly. I'm so excited. I'm furiously writing notes. Furiously in terms of speed, not anger, of course. Wow, my mind is buzzing with questions. I'm sure other folks are buzzing with questions as well. Feel free to either pop them in the chat or raise one's hand over Zoom. I was just wondering, folks, the audience is thinking of questions. Are there any questions or comments from our panelists to each other, right? Because I saw a lot of really great commonalities in folks' presentations. Mm-hmm.
There's some questions in the chat.
There are, yes, and we can return to that too. So we have from Alan McDonald. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts, any of the panelists' thoughts on coming back to academic work after a hiatus. Are there any particular pros and cons to doing a PhD several years after completing a master's? And then Lauren, in particular, was Looking for any thoughts from Sharon as they are considering taking a break after their master's. So yeah, just any particular advice on whether she saw benefit in waiting to do a PhD after working positions outside of academia.
I can jump in to answer that. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Lauren. I do think there's actually, I didn't think in the moment there was a benefit because the gap I felt was actually doing me more harm than good. But in hindsight, many, many years after having actually worked in between my master's and my PhD, and again, build the relationships, it's less so even about the work, it's about the relationships that are fostered through the work that you get to do in community, whatever community means to you, right? Community is often utilized uncritically, but like I have a very specific definition of how I utilize the word community. So it was a huge benefit, Lauren. And all of a sudden, it's like that web image where you have something in the middle, and then all of a sudden it's offshooting into so many different relationships and opportunities and people. That's how I felt it was like for me after I finished my master's through the 9 to 5 job I had, but then everything I did in the museum sector, the British Columbia Museums heritage space, I'm really proud of. I really like the way the BC Museums Association operates and heritage organizations operate. And so it's been a real blessing to be able to be connected, tied to the people in those spaces. So I actually do think it is of benefit. And it also could be because again, of the age I was at that time, the position I had, where my life was at that time, where it benefited me more to work in that kind of 8 or however many year hiatus I had between my master's and PhD. But I think the advice I would give is while you are if you choose to take a break between the master's and PhD, do it with intention to like foster relationships and like reciprocity in the work. We tend to be very extractive sometimes when we are doing PhD work, interviewing communities. I know I've kept in touch with every single one of the communities. My PhD looks at Chinese, Japanese, and Sikh experiences. And I've kept in touch to this very day. In fact, I'm doing a consulting project on Japanese Canadians at the Nikkei National Museum because of the relationships I fostered 10 years ago. So intention really matters, and not being extractive really matters too.
Would any other panelists want to add on to that? Okay.
I guess I can jump in a little bit. I mean, like I feel like if there's a calling for the research and the work that you're doing, then absolutely returning would be my recommendation. Like I just, shouting to the choir that a PhD and the skills you acquire during a PhD are very useful outside, and you can sort of foster, do the work that makes your heart sing at the same time as gain really valuable skills that make you really employable. So yeah, I mean, that's my 2 cents again.
Great. And then we have a question from Sam. Oh yeah, great. Wonderful phrase. From Sam Huckabee, would any of the panelists recommend attending generic resume preparation talks, writing groups, or other help in learning how to, reframe our experiences to job prospects outside of academia? Did any of you attend those types of workshops, or did you sort of learn through like trial and error by yourself in order to advertise your skills?
I can start, I guess. Or Adam, go ahead, because you
Oh,
haven't
no, go.
answered yet.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, no.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Adam.
Okay. I guess at least from my experience, because I had to co-op, I had to do a co-op course. So instead of just a workshop, I had a full 12-week dive into thinking about how to reframe my experiences, to highlight my skills and how to talk about them for a resume. So I guess it could help. It depends on what you're looking to get out of it, because I feel too, a lot of benefit I got was after that, and kind of having taken some time to like test it out and apply it with jobs, then bringing it back to some of my friends and my mentor, and kind of sitting with them and discussing what happened, how did it work, what kind of stories worked, which ones did not really work, or didn't quite land, or was I using examples that were kind of reaching too far for skills that there wasn't really as much of a connection as I maybe hoped there was. Um, that's kind of what I found. So I guess I know I kind of went about in a bit of a circle, but I think there can be value in attending workshops, but I don't think workshops or resume cover letter workshops are the only way to go about kind of figuring out how to tease out these skills and stories to kind of highlight your qualities. You can definitely also turn to your friends, peers, and any mentors you may have as well.
Just to follow up, uh, I guess the example that I had for the resume that I keep on my desktop that I continue to add to every day comes from my doctoral supervisor. So, they really do lead by example and mentor you. Um, and funny enough, I didn't revamp my resume to send to non-for-profits when I was applying, when I was fresh out. I think the really long CV was appreciated in that context. I was also hired by someone that has a PhD. So she knows, the executive director at that institution really was attuned to the value of someone that, has academic accolades. So, maybe just do your research on the organizations that you're going to be applying to and cater your resume to that organization specifically. Um, I didn't know that there was a PhD person reviewing my resume. Had I known, maybe I would have done something differently, but I'm happy that I didn't. So there's things to be learned in trial and error. And, one just piece of advice is if you're going to be applying for any job, always rewrite your cover letter. In any even sessional position that I'm applying for and teaching, like it's always be interested in what you're actually going to be doing, because that really stands out. So, yeah.
Can I just jump in quickly to answer that as well? Sam, my short answer would be no. Like I didn't attend, like take part in resume preparation workshops or any of that, just echoing what Adam and Taylor are saying. But Henry, my supervisor, said something to me when I was in the middle of writing my dissertation. And he's like, Sharon, your dissertation is like your business card. He's like, wherever
Mhm.
you take that dissertation and the way people interpret it and read it, even if they just read the intro or like first chapter, he's like, that is your calling. And I don't know why that's always struck me because when I was writing it, it was during Black Lives Matter resurgence in 2020, and I rage wrote. Like I rage wrote that sucker in 2 months. And then he and I had to kind of not tone it down, but like make it, I don't know what the language is. I still to this day don't know, digestible or make it,
Palatable.
yeah, something like that. But he did a fantastic job with that. And the reason why he's like, this is your calling. So you almost don't need to worry about making a resume or a CV that is able to capture who you are because that dissertation has a lot of power in it. Quickly as well,
Mhm.
I think Adam, you made a really great comment, or sorry, Adam or Taylor said something like, we've got all the skills. Like when you realize you could call yourself a historian, like there's real beauty in that where you say capital H historian, and what does that mean? And kind of claim that title and claim all the beautiful skills that are transferable through that title. For some reason, we're reticent to do that, and I don't
Mhm.
think we need to be.
Completely agree. Amazing questions so far. And here's another really great one. So, in your experience from Tyla, did the general workforce or your employers already understand the transferable skills and see the value in your history degrees? Or did you have to change minds about sort of why it's relevant and why it prepared you well?
I have a great example. So again, I'm just speaking to the Street Haven employment that I had because it's the most recent, but in being hired by someone that had a PhD, she really understood the breadth of my skills, etc. But, in that context, I actually had to do some internal, debates where, because there's something going on in the public that is not necessarily what a historian would be doing. So I had to really go against my intuitive skill to understand and have them understand, what's actually what I'm doing, right? So I wouldn't say I changed minds. I just sort of showed them what a historian would do in that moment. When we're all sitting at the meeting table and we're talking about the various grants that we have to work on this week and, what's important and what's relevant. I think being able to just think quickly is also something that we need to be more attentive to, I guess, and that we actually have those skills to do so.
Do you want to add anything, Adam, before I jump in?
No, go for it. I think we need a couple more minutes to sit on
Okay.
it.
Yeah, thanks, Tyla, for a great question. I think I've been very lucky where I don't think I've had to, like, especially in my public service job, both. Parks Canada was obviously positioned as a historian, so the assumptions are there. But then in my role as in the multiculturalism and anti-racism program, again, I think it's because I had so many other decades of experience that like filled in any potential questions that could have been around transferable skills. So I've been very lucky that way. Again, I would say don't be afraid to apply for jobs because you fear that your skills as a historian aren't seen as transferable by the person reading the resume or the person. I actually think the cover letter, like Taylor said, is the strongest piece. How you sell yourself sounds really bad. Yeah, how you position yourself, how you make it sexy, how you make it like it's got to be all those things in a cover letter, because that's my energy is always in that cover letter when I apply.
Yeah, I think that's brilliantly put from both of you. And to spare you are from hearing me just say the same thing over again. I think the only thing I will kind of toss in there as well is I feel like it's always better to say more than just assume that they kind of know about you because they might not. I feel like it's kind of like how I used to write my essays. I'd explain everything out as if the reader knew nothing about what I was talking about, and then leave it for them to kind of pull together from it what I'm hopefully are wanting them to see.
I should also add the serendipity in that exhibit that I created for Street Haven lent me to a job at Sonderbloom. Like the principal of the company at the Street Haven exhibit came up to me and was like, hey, you want to do consulting work? So, like just always be showing your best skills. Like what you're trained to do is so valuable. And I'm so fortunate and lucky that that happened. But, this is just me just saying over and over that be confident and recognize those skills because someone also will. And you'll have wonderful careers. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I guess similarly from Anne, do you have any general networking advice? Thank you. And I think this is such an important question because I feel like the notion of networking, it can be very intimidating, I think, for historians. We can be such introvert nerds, but I do think it is such, as I'm an introverted nerd, I do think it is so important. So I guess, yeah, any sort of general advice on networking?
Isn't there a word for people who are like extroverted and introverted? There's a word for it. I feel like that's
ambivert?
you. Maybe.
Oh, thank you.
Omnivert. Thank you, Erin.
Omnivert. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of historians are omniverts. Great question. I think listening to hear rather than listening to respond is really important. And that's more like a human skill. Like we are in such a rapid paced world where networking, when I think networking, I think of those awful like business networking things that make me cringe and people whip out their business cards. I never have a business card on me, first of all. But I actually want to hear people's stories. I want to hear what's going on in their life, whatever they're able to share. And I wish if networking was more humanized and we were capable of just humanizing that experience, it would build to better trust building and relationship making, which allows then employers or other humans to say, reach out to you and be like, hey, I met you here in such and such place. Would you be like Taylor, the person who said to you, hey, would you want to consult? There's a reason why, like you were remembered, you stuck in somebody's mind. So I think just humanizing the experience of networking rather than making about a mission to get a job. And people can sense that authenticity, I think, when you are in these spaces.
Yeah, I love that. I'm thinking about being a graduate student and just not being afraid to enter the room. Like as a master's student, I think I walked into the Osgood Society 40th anniversary dinner and I felt like I had no business being there, but then I just took a deep breath, got a glass of white wine, and stood there as if I belonged. And sure enough, someone came up to me and said, "Hi, what's your name?" And that itself lent me to so much more. I think that was the day I officially met Constance Backhouse, who ended up being a primary source on my dissertation and now a colleague of mine. But it's just those serendipitous moments, don't sell yourself short, walk into the room, because it can open up just like a world of possibility. So I hope I've inspired somebody today.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was at my ACA conference meeting members of the board who'd later tap me to join them, I wasn't going there at the express purpose of being like, I want to be a director at large. It just
Yeah.
happened.
I was interested in legal history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, sometimes as a graduate student, you can feel like you have nothing to offer people back. But I often find that as a professional, people are really interested to hear what's going on in the schools, especially in archives where it's a lot less of academia unless you're connected maybe to a university or something of that nature. You almost feel like you might be a little disconnected from the latest teachings. And so for you, you were like, oh, I want to talk to students. What are they interested in? What's kind of new in the world and how are they learning differently than I have? Um, I remember too, one of my teachers recommended just email someone, just cold email them and be like, hey, I see you work here. I'd love to hear more about yourself, where you work, and kind of take the conversation from there. But always remember, um, I think you both made a great point. It's about the connection. It's not going in there for a job or a purpose. It's just to meet people and learn about them.
Mm. I just want to say one more thing on that. Back to method a little bit. If you're thinking of doing an oral history project, this will teach you how to cold email, how to, talk to people that are maybe a little bit unfamiliar through the World Wide Web, right? Like there's so much to be gained in doing an oral history project. So there's my pitch for oral history.
Wonderful. So this is from Joe Brasado. So for all the panelists, how did you ensure that your values align with the organizations or sectors that you started working in? Is it just a matter of sort of asking questions of potential employers? Joe goes on to add, right? Like, I appreciate that skills are important for self-marketing, but ensuring that your values align with employer can also be crucial in Joe's experience.
I mean, I guess a quick answer to this question is we never know until we're inside. And if something is not, aligning, whether it's the fundamental way the organization operates every day, the culture of the organization is a shift, inside the institution is very different the way it seemed outside. That's the primary basis of my work, right? You don't really know the everyday in and outs until you get there. So taking a chance on something that you've taken the time to research, that, for me, helping a women's organization document its institutional history was enough for me to say, I would like to apply for this role. So, you can be picky about the things where you send your resume into. And you can also choose to exit when you feel like you've taken enough from the role that you've been involved in, right? And I think it's just a series of choices, and every institution is different, and every employer is different, and everything has inside information that is not disclosed when you first enter. So, yeah.
And I feel like too, from what you can see, where possible, like with me with the United Church, is you can look at the outputs of the organization and look at their mission statements and kind of what they put out into the world to get a sense of, do your values align with them? Like when I started, it was because it was truth and reconciliation work, and we have projects on anti-oppressive redescription work. And so I was like, okay, these are values that are important to me, and it's clear that this institution's implementing them. And like you said, then it's all a chance from there about internally how that plays out.
Sorry, I like to read the words. So this is Joe Brasato's question, right? Okay, just wanted to make sure I'm answering the right question. Um, uh, Sometimes you can't always make sure that you get a job where the values align because you literally have to pay bills. And that is sometimes a situation people are in. Got to make rent money, you got to feed your kids, you got to make so it's not an easy question to answer because sometimes it causes inner conflict in yourself. So I just want to kind of present that as well, especially again in academia and the discipline and the humanities, right? We all know that humanities is unfortunately facing a bit of a crisis in the academic sector, the cuts that are taking place. So like, how do you figure that out and align yourself in a position where you feel like you're not facing internal conflict? It's not always the easy decision. But my hope would be that as historians, even if we are entering a position because we have to, that we can somehow still move the needle. So I'm in public service. I have a lot of issues with public service, right? I have a lot of issues with the government of Canada. But it doesn't mean that the position that I'm not in, I don't move the needle forward. I don't enter spaces and make conversations uncomfortable. And I hope, and I think actually we are lucky to be equipped with the capacity to do that. That's another really important skill set where we can vocalize some of the challenges that we want to put forth in the spaces that we work in. So I may not be giving the best answer, Joe. Sometimes you have to suck it up because of the economy and you got to pay the bills, but maybe there's a way we can still move the needle forward that aligns with our values and the things that we want to do in these systems.
Thank you so much. I co-sign all of that. I think the question on networking, I love all the questions. The question on networking, I think was really great too, because it is such a big component. So I'd like to ask a question about another, I think, really big component of academic success, career success around mentors. Basically, and it's basically like, how does one get that? Because I know I'm like you, Sharon, like I would not be part of the CHA if not for my mentors. Shout out Joe McCutcheon, Rachel Hope Cleves. Mentorship, I think, is so, and mentoring in turn is like so nurturing and so beneficial across so many spheres. But I do think it can be one of those things like networking where it's like it can be sort of intimidating in the sense of like, how do I do this? How do I be a mentee? How do I find people who will mentor me, right? So I guess just general comments on sort of being a mentee, how to get mentors, I think would be really useful.
This answer might seem like a bit of a plug, but the ACA has a mentorship program specifically designed to help students and newly grads connect with professionals in the field to have those conversations together and kind of start that relationship without kind of putting all the onus on a mentee to search out a mentor. It's worked for me. My mentor's kind of become a lovely friend of mine as well. So that's one thing you can do is if your profession has like an association, you can see if they do any programs like that. Maybe there's stuff through school, like I think U of T, at least for the iSchool, they also had a form of mentorship program, if I'm remembering it right. So there's opportunities there, but I'm curious to see for Taylor and Sharon what their thoughts are.
There's also a question in the chat about how we've sort of paid it forward. And as someone I feel so freshly minted in, post PhD land that I still will reflect upon the wonderful experiences that I had at York University's history department. While I had my supervisor, Dr. Marlene Shore, from my undergrad, this was the professor who said to me I was in sociolegal studies. She says, "You're a historian." And then I continued and I did a master's in history and then I did a PhD in history because she was so talk about retention. This woman had it. And, I stayed throughout the course of it because I was so interested and inquisitive. And, all of my professors were so wonderful and lovely that I really, felt like I could just go into their office and have a discussion. And then, the next thing, rolled over and suddenly I'm doing research for BC Wildlife Project. And, so I really, really can't emphasize enough just to take the opportunity that you have as graduate students to connect with your professors, and to learn what their interests are, because maybe one day they will offer you an RA-ship. You don't know. Like, I didn't go into that office thinking I was going to walk out as an employee. But like there's something to be said about really, really fostering those relationships, and um, taking the time to learn about the people who are teaching you. I guess that's my best advice at this point. I've paid it forward in a sense where I've led undergraduate teams in research, and I've done it to that extent. And I will just think about all of the really great opportunities that I've had and all of those mentors that I've had in my graduate career. And I hope to make an impression on the next generation of students. So, I again, just using what we have at our fingertips is so, so important.
I'm obsessed with the word mentorship. I'm obsessed with like what mentorship means in terms of methodology, how it's overused, how it's underused. Like, what does it actually mean to me personally? Because this is all I think of. Everything that I do is how am I impacting like future generations. There is a word in the Sikh tradition called seva, SEVA, and it means selfless service to your communities. And communities can be anything. And I really, really think about that a lot, because the way I give back and the mentorship that I'm fostering is actually not with university aged students or university going students, I should say. It's with the K to 12 youth. So for 20 years, I've been giving tours of the Sikh Heritage Museum. It's a National Historic Site of Canada. It's a Canada-wide designated heritage site. And I've given tours to kids from all over our community, and those have been my most impactful moments. They are the ones who come back to me. They are the ones who see a spark of an interest in like our field. And yeah, back to public history. Actually, somebody made a comment saying we all tend to keep going back to public history. But even how I build the connections on like graphic design work and like networking and marketing through the Sikh Heritage Museum, that has been my most impactful work. And it's because I haven't been able to get into the academic sector or get hired in the academic space that I've looked to K to 12 instead. And that K to 12 is such an underlooked, I think, bridge between like these grade 12 students are eventually going to enter university. Like, what is the sort of bridges that we are building as academics? And I feel like we don't pay attention to that enough oftentimes. I continue to do all that work, volunteer in the community, because I want kids to see themselves reflected in our histories and stories. And those of us who've been in the Canadian school system, we don't always see ourselves reflected in the social studies curriculum or whatnot. So that's mentorship to me. And if they come back to me, I want to actually do an exhibit where I get like high school students to curate an exhibit at the Sikh Heritage Museum. So that's my goal, to teach them how to just curate stories, and they get to show their beautiful stories on panels and be called a curator for a day or a few months or whatever. I think that's important work as well.
Absolutely. I have a question from Colin Coates. Hope I'm pronouncing that right.
There I am. Yeah, thanks for, I didn't want to take any space from the other questions, but thanks for, thanks for organizing the event, Aino and Catherine. And great to see you again, Taylor and Sharon, and nice to meet you, Adam. Thanks for everything that you've said today, because I think it's really important and really, I mean, very encouraging too. And I think what we have to figure out how to do is to capture that, the way you've been presenting the material. And I guess this, a lot of people here won't know, I'm the president of the Canadian Historical Association, so that's why I'm listening in to hear what you have to say. But my general question is just, the Canadian Historical Association historically has been largely aimed at supporting the work of those who teach in the academy. It's never exclusively been that, and it's never exclusively been historians of what we call Canada. it is, it's always been broader than that, I think, for a very long time. But there certainly, I think, are concerns that, what do we do for all the public historians? I think public historians don't always feel, I'm told, don't always feel welcome at our conferences, which I find very unfortunate, as I think they should be there. And my impression was they always were there at our conferences. But I guess the question I have is how can we in the Canadian Historical Association help people think of the broader importance of the historical skills that they've acquired? What kind of practical things can we do? And Adam's mentioned mentorship. I mean, in the way in academia, in theory, you get that from your supervisors. I know that doesn't always work the same way. For some people, it does really, really well. But anyways, that's the question: is what can the Canadian Historical Association do to support the variety of careers that history grads, undergrads, masters, PhD students might choose to go on to? Thanks.
I'm happy to jump on first. I do actually already think that I've always thought public historians were there, because a lot of the people who I run into at CHA conferences, at Congress in the past, were doing work in public history. And, so to me, that's a strange concept. But I think there was a panel a few years back at the CHA that was talking about the move from using AI in our courses and how we can understand the algorithm. And, so just, I think maybe having attention to what's going on in contemporary times, and leading panels and discussions, especially like this one. I think that's extremely helpful for people to understand. At least the next generation of historians are going to have this. People who attended today are going to have this to refer to, like, what can I do with my skills outside of that, traditional path that people often think is the only way to go. But I think the CHA has been doing a really great job for the past few years on ironing this out, and giving a lot of opportunities for individuals to come and share their experiences from various areas in the academy and otherwise, right? So it's beyond the question of alt-ac. It's the majority of people are in alt-ac. And so I think we can all just, be attentive to that and provide those opportunities. Not that we're not already, but even more so, I guess. So that would be my answer for now.
Mab.
Hi, Aino. Thank you so
Hey.
much for this presentation. I'll just introduce myself as well as the Executive Director of the Association of Canadian Archivists. So very happy to hear everything that was said today. It was very illuminating, and also really reflects my own journey through academia and into public history. So thank you, everyone. I had a follow-up piggybacking on Colin's question, and also my own investment in this field specifically. I'm wondering if any of the panelists could speak to specifically participation on boards, because we know that broadly within the nonprofit sector, the nature of volunteerism is drastically changing. Expectations on people's time and capacity, everything is shifting in the workforce as we know it. And since joining the ACA just a couple months ago, I've been really blown away by the amount of time and commitment that our volunteer board members and committee members put in. But I recognize that the asks on them are complicated, and also can limit who is able to participate on boards. And I'm just wondering, as we continue to see this shift, if in your own experiences there are things, and this could be a general question as well, there are things that would make board work more approachable, more feasible, or how do you see any of those shifts making it a more welcoming space for folks coming out of academia and into professional organizations or into careers that are aligned with professional organizations.
Thank you, Matt. That's a big question. I don't know if I'm exactly qualified to answer it. I think my experience clearly is very grounded in coming into a board position straight out of grad school without any previous experience. I think part of it might be perhaps having a means of kind of explaining to wider membership or even the wider public, like the roles on the board and the types of work that goes into the different positions. Like when I was taking on director at large position, I didn't really know what I was getting into. Maybe that's my fault because I didn't really look too closely into the previous annual reports of the ACA before I said yes. But I think, yeah, there's something to be said about kind of talking about the extent of the work that's going to be done. And maybe also finding ways to either get people, if they're maybe scared about the idea of being on a board, suggest that they maybe look on being part of a committee or smaller capacities first and kind of have them maybe figure out what they do or don't like or how they feel about being in these sorts of roles without necessarily putting them right at the tippy top.
Mab, I'm still overthinking your question. Like it is such a big question because my experience with boards in the heritage sector is that oftentimes it is people who are retired and have the capacity, both in every way, shape, and form, to be able to serve on a board. And because of that, you often miss out on many, many different intergenerational lived experiences on said boards. And yet those boards also yield a lot of power to whatever, to exclude, include, whatever. So I really struggle with boards because I wish there was a way like to help foster, especially like students coming out of the university. Adam, like for you, like the out of, grad school into a board position, like I wish there was a way to offer honorariums to people for their time and labor. And I know that's not always feasible. So my easy solution would be to pay them, but of course that's just not possible. So what does it look like to kind of merge this mentorship model that, again, I'm obsessed with, in a way that like younger people can get into board roles where they have decision-making power? I don't have the answer for that because I do think some boards are able to give honorariums and see how that is needed, but others simply do not have the capacity, though I see the value because I see things that go awry when we are missing voices in certain board positions. I also see the opposite end of what you're talking about, where people are asked to do so much that things get lost in the foray, and people aren't able to put their full selves in the role of board positions and do the work because there's so much to do. So I'm not answering your question because I think it's a pan-Canadian, who knows, North American issue with this. But I wish there was a way universities could offer like co-op positions or like some sort of some credit, something that they are doing in the role of a board position as it relates to the historical discipline. I wish there was ways to build a bridge where we are fostering intergenerational experiences on boards, but they're also getting something out of it. That would be a really cool model. I don't think it exists, but maybe that's a way to bridge the labor-intensive nature of board work. Taylor, I think Lauren sent you a private message. Maybe if you want to check your messages and see for a question.
I just saw this now. Thank you, Lauren, for, I had no idea that tab existed. So the question is about Canadian children's television programming and how to break into the field. And what I can say is that opportunity came through the Canadian Museum of History when they were working on the exhibit called From Pepino to Paw Patrol. And I had experience reading, Matthew Hayday's From CRT. I can't remember the actual name at this moment in time, as I'm going back into comps trauma at this moment. But I had those experiences because I did the PhD in Canadian history more broadly, which actually, some of us are all like, oh, why are we reading about Canadian television programs in the Royal Commission on the National Development of the Arts, Letters, and Sciences? But it's relevant. It helps me get that job. I knew what I was talking about, right? So, and then I went in and was able to analyze and code and score, how these programs would be received in the museum context. So, it's, again, I got it into it, I think maybe by serendipity, but it lent itself to a whole breadth of other opportunities that was fairly early on in my graduate career. So really, really happy that I got that experience at the museum. But there's always an appetite for understanding the history of television. So my advice is to read those really key pieces of scholarship. Happy to share. Maybe mentor you. And thank you so much for your question and for listening.
Wonderful. And we are almost at time, but I was remiss. I missed a question I believe primarily for Taylor from Sandy Stewart. Do you have any advice for those student applying for postdocs? A big question, right?
Big question. What I can say is finish your dissertation. Do the project you've set forth in front of you, and then think about what you're going to do later. I applied for my postdoc after I was already finished, and I'm working on an entirely new project now. So, I got to finish my book manuscript and I got to finish the dissertation and move on. And I think that's actually a really great way, at least maybe in my experience, to do that. And I'm happy to chat offline and connect with folks who want to talk about SHRC applications and all of that. Maybe this is where I'm tapping shoulders for mentorship. So yay, I've gained something here today too. So I'm so, again, grateful for the opportunity to share. Aino and Catherine, thanks so much again. And thank you, Colin, as well.
Thank you so much. This has been such a joy, so many pleasant surprises, so much wonderful wisdom and knowledge. I had such a joy being here, and I'm very excited that this will be on YouTube. Folks, I will definitely be returning to this. I know other folks will definitely be seeking this out, could not be here today. So yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to our audience for asking such wonderful questions. Thank you.
And thank you.